Have anyone to do the invocation, so we'll have 60 seconds of silence. Now for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Here.
Mrs. Hoover.
Here.
Ms. Royce.
Here.
Mr. Kelch.
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
All members present. Moving on to amendment of agenda. This evening we have one item. We're going to remove item F, the minutes for the December 12th, 2023 meeting. Mr. Braden.
Motion to amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mr. Braden. May I have a second? Mrs. Hoover?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
Ms. Royce.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
All members present, voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to item item I, request to address council. This evening, we have one request to address council. It's Mr. David Benz. Could you please come up forward, sir, to the microphone, state your name, and then you'll have 5 minutes for your topic.
I did a lot of running today. I've got this on my phone, so I didn't have a chance to print it out, which would have been a lot easier, believe me. When initially discussed in 2020, Mayor Snyder agreed about having no alcohol in the park. Ordinance number 38, July 2023 states that the Victory Park Veterans Association would be advised of any changes and would have to approve any changes. Previous council meeting in December recorded 2 readings of the ordinance. It was amended at the meeting to disassociate the Victory Park veterans and change the wording from requiring our approval to just being advised of the action. There's no mention of time to notify before the action was taken. Council effectively violated their own ordinance, number 38 in July, by failing to advise us and ask for our support. In my opinion, it was not an oversight, as they are well aware of our position on alcohol in Victory Park. Mayor Snyder, being a man of his word, refused to sign the ordinance as amended and is to be commended for that. The Montgomery Road signage states Victory Park Memorial. The park is not limited to the Memorial Park up to a tree line, in which we believe includes the entire parcel, including the market house currently referred to as the safety lane. We ask that in light of the failure to notify and receiving approval per the ordinance, that this matter be moved to an agenda in a meeting in January Our Legion Post will review the matter at our January 2nd meeting, where it will be referred to the Executive Board for consideration on July 16th, prior to your fourth Tuesday meeting. I've been advised that there is no immediate need for the passage of this ordinance, and we simply ask to be afforded the opportunity to review and respond. I want to thank you folks for your time, and we wish all a prosperous, healthy, safe, and happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benz. Next, we'll move on to item K. K is the third reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item K1, an ordinance amending Chapter 561 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances entitled Parks and Playgrounds to expand and clarify alcohol permits as amended. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we table this ordinance.
We have a motion by Mr. Kelch. Mrs. Franzen?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson?
I would suggest rather tabling the ordinance that you put off having the third reading until they have an opportunity to review the ordinance. If you table it, then I don't remember everything that's involved with that, but
Mrs. Franzen?
Yeah, whatever makes sense for that. I understand and respect their concern with the memorial, and I want to make sure that the ordinance is explicit in that there's not going to be any alcohol available or reservations available at the memorial. It was never my intent. I didn't want anyone going and getting drunk at the memorial. So just to make sure that we make it really explicit in the ordinance, and whatever makes sense for that. And I apologize, I don't know the proper way to do that, tabling or what you said, Mr. Thompson.
Okay. Mrs. Hoover?
I'm wondering if we could put it back into the Parks Committee, if that would make sense, instead of tabling, for it to go back into Parks for consideration.
Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So what my concern is, and we have Mr. Gary here, I can maybe go through the chair and ask Mr. Gary, is in the third reading at this juncture with the ordinance, is it still allowed to be amended or whatever kind of changes be made to it? Because that would really sway my choice on either tabling versus placing back in committee, with it being in the third reading stage.
Mr. Gary?
I believe we'd have to have, if it were substantially amended, we'd have to have 3 readings from that point.
Okay.
In other words, because it's changed, there really will not have been 2 prior readings.
Right. So it would probably make more sense then, other than tabling it, to place it back into the Parks Committee. So if I could, I'd like to amend my motion from tabling the ordinance to placing it back into the Parks Committee.
Okay.
For further discussion.
So Mr. Kelch is amending his motion to place the ordinance back into the Parks Committee.
I'm happy to amend my motion and second that as well.
Mrs. Franzen will amend her motion as well to put this back into the Parks Committee. Any further discussion? Mr. Braden?
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate that. So I just wanted to say a few things that I was thinking. First, I want to say that I appreciate Ms. Franzen that you second that. That's really noble, and I appreciate you. Thank you. But I think what comes to mind is we don't really see our veterans much here in Norwood. They coming out, they're speaking their mind, and they don't really wish to have alcohol around their memorial. And the fact that we don't see them much, and they coming out and asking us that, I think that we should really consider maybe reconsidering alcohol at Victory, or at least around the memorial or some, because as I sit here, I have thoughts for and against this issue. I really remember the days where I used to go to Victory Park and enjoy myself. My mother used to bring me, and I was too young to drink, but I remember enjoying myself, and people were all drink. So I enjoy those times. However, I guess my point would be, we don't see our veterans here in Norwood much. And here they are, they're coming out, they're speaking their mind. I would hope that we could all, in solidarity, respect their wishes, and stand with them as they don't want their memorial of their loved ones and their friends and families, trashed in any way. So I just appreciate them coming. I'm glad they're here, and I would hope that we would all stand in solidarity with them and show them that we love them and we want to do what they wish for their memorial. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Anyone else? Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to, thank Mr. Braden for his words there, and also thank Ms. Franzen for her second on this motion. As a veteran myself, this is something that I'm really, really, really invested in. And as it being a memorial, I understand people's desire, need, and want to rent parks out, especially, a park like Victory Park. That's a really amazing park. But there's always a time and place for, partying and having alcoholic beverages. Somebody enjoys that. Myself, I see that need. But, at a place like the Memorial Park, where when you're a veteran, you're in a brotherhood, and being the only one here in this room, I kind of understand where other people might not share that same perspective, but to have that kind of activity going on at a place like that, it's real dirty and it's real nasty, and it doesn't feel as though the city would support you as a veteran if that were allowed to take place. So I want to thank Mr. Braden for his words. I want to thank Ms. Franzen, and I hope that all you guys vote to place this back in committee tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. So the motion on the floor by Mr. Kelch to move this ordinance back to the Parks Committee, second by Mrs. Franzen. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item M1. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Thompson.
Move we suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
Only that I'm pretty sure this is the last one.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Thompson.
Move we pass.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item M2, an ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property within the city of Norwood, Ohio to be a public purpose and exempt from real property taxation, requiring the owners of those parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit such real property, authorizing the distribution of the application portion of those service payments to Norwood City School District and Great Oaks Institute of Technology and Career Development, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Thompson.
Move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to suspend the rules and have all three readings. May I have a second? Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
I'd like to go ahead and invite you up if you'd like to.
Yes, you can do my spiel again, or just in specific?
If you want to do a small spiel.
Okay. Sure, I
I
was
don't know
gonna
if anybody
say,
had any questions. so.
just reading this 3 times is enough of a spiel. So
Right.
I can appreciate the preference for some brevity on my part. But it is long here, but I think I can just go through that again. Actually, the header includes most of what we're doing. It has from what I look at, about 3 different components, which the first one is that we're exempting the incremental value of that property, the subject property within the TIF, from tax. And what you're doing by this resolution is requiring the owners of that property to, instead of paying the taxes on the incremental value, to pay payments in lieu of tax. You're establishing a fund into which those funds will be deposited. You're stating what the funds in that fund can be used for, which are the public infrastructure improvements that'll benefit that. So roads, sewers, utilities, sidewalks, the things that you generally think of as public infrastructure. And then you're also authorizing those funds to be used to pay the school district and the joint vocational school district. So they will not be negatively impacted by this. It'll actually be, because of some more complex rules, they should benefit from it, but they will be paid from these parcels exactly the same amount they would have been absent what we're doing here today. So you're basically, again, it's the incremental value, so that all the taxes that are currently being paid will still be paid as they normally are. The tax on incremental value will be diverted to either pay for public infrastructure in the area up on, I've called it the Central Park tip area, but it's Central Park on the east end towards Factory 52 and some of the more commercial stuff down there. The money will be used for those improvements in the future to, as needed by council, I think, basically, and then to make sure the school districts aren't negatively impacted by this sort of diversion of some of the taxes to pay for those improvements. Yes.
So
Sorry, I don't know.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. I
I was going to say, should the clerk or the president call you to talk?
So I had two questions. I had been doing some research on it. So this is,
Yeah.
it seems similar to what Cincinnati's been doing with TIF fund districts. Is that kind of the same idea where they've taken these parcels and used it for explicitly, basically what you said?
Yes, there are some, and there is some nuance to the different types of TIFs, and it's, in this case, for example, I won't go through all of them and bore you all to death. I can appreciate, there's many more people here today than were at the office, so congratulations to you all. But some of them are more for, say, single-family houses. In this case, we've only included multifamily, which is what's considered commercial. But yes, to your question, the basic idea is that the incremental taxes are diverted to pay for public infrastructure. In some TIFs, there's a little broader use. We could use it for private infrastructure in some circumstances, but here this is all, now public infrastructure is a little broader than you would think, but it does include everything you would consider to be public infrastructure.
Yeah, so this is not benefiting a particular business or a particular developer. This is something that is basically the city is saying, we're going to use it for this area. I'm just saying this so that it is hopefully clear to everyone.
Yes, no, absolutely. And in a lot of cases, there is a particular developer
Right.
where they'll come and say, hey, we're going to build something, and we know there's going to be a great amount of incremental value.
Right.
We want to capture that. We know the amount we hope for. And in some of those circumstances, that owner will agree to potentially pay for any deficiencies in those amounts to pay for debt. But here, it's going to be in the fund. It will be available to be used. Again, I can't think of any circumstance where there wouldn't be some return back to sort of make those decisions about how it will be used. But right now, it's not allocated for a particular use. And there's no agreement that the city, we're not contemplating a particular agreement at this point with a particular developer. They will have access to those funds or it will particularly benefit them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Reed?
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. So for people watching, are we talking about a particular development, or are we talking about a certain development here in Norwood, or are we talking about a broad?
It's a broad area of property. There's a few different blocks up by Central Park over there, and then there's the multicolored buildings. Yeah, it is. It should be on the back.
Generally, it covers the Siemens property. Goes across Park for that last block where the four families are. And then it goes kind of catty corner from there over to the multicolored property.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Kelps?
Thank you. Does this have the capacity to maybe injure any of these properties or businesses around them by having to do this?
No, they will pay the taxes in the same manner and in the exact same amount as they would otherwise pay. For them, it'll be just, you get your house or wherever you get your tax bill, they'll pay it, but then the treasurer actually collects it at the county. They will then send it over to the city, and what they do is, we've gone through this a few times in a little bit different ways, but what they'll do is they send over all the TIF money, and they send what's called a settlement statement, and it will say, this will be TIF number. If you were to pass this evening, we would send it to the state, and they will have a number assigned to it. And then when the money comes in it'll be twice a year, this, like when taxes come in, they'll send over something that says, here's the amount that was collected that's due to that increment, and that will go into this particular fund that will have a number here at the city and have a probably brief name, and then that's how you know that those funds are available to benefit that particular area. So they're not just in one big thing, like it'll be.
And they
the
can all
different
like,
tips.
pull from it to make whatever improvements necessary?
Yeah, so the city around there, it's something because I think there's some anticipated probably further development up there. Properties will be sold, property
Yeah.
values are going up. And so, because one of the reasons that it's up for your consideration this evening is because the value at the time that you pass the ordinance is sort of the baseline valuation. So let's say right now it's worth $5 million. It goes up to $6 million. The taxes that are paid on that additional $1 million after today will go into the TIF fund. So next year, if property's values go up, that tax that's generated by the incremental value starting from now will be captured and able to be used for public infrastructure, maintenance of public infrastructure, improvement of public infrastructure.
And I just have one more question, and this is probably
Ask it as
maybe
you
a
want.
better question for our Safe Service Director. I see on here, it seems like there's some residential properties kind of enclosed in this. Are we
They're-
taking any
Those are
specific?
those are those four-family
Yeah,
properties?
yeah. Are we taking any specific measures like that we can talk about right now as a city to like educate these residents and business owners around here of what is happening?
No, we have not.
Do we plan to?
Like Pat was saying, this isn't something that you're going to notice a difference on, so your tax bill will look like your tax bill always looks. So from the property owner's standpoint, they're not going to see any difference at
Right.
all. It's just going to be where the county is sending those tax dollars.
Okay.
Yeah, they will literally, it won't go up, down, it'll go up just by the valuation that the auditor places on that,
Right.
which will not take into account the fact that it's in or outside of the TIF district. And the same with I know we talked about this, but the schools are particularly sensitive about real property taxes. And I know that there's some effort that's been put towards having having a good relationship, and they were informed, and there's been some discussions. They know that this is not going to negatively impact them. And if it were to, you have to get their approval, essentially. Not in every case, but in some circumstances. So in this case, for everybody involved, it really is a way to allow the city to use a tool so that some of this money can really be used in the city, this particular area. Potentially because of development, there's additional burden put on the infrastructure and making sure that you have the resources available to, for those residents, for example, traffic is always an issue with these things, or road sidewalks, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so, just
Sorry.
more for the edification of everyone
President.
who might be watching or was interested in this. The way I'm thinking about it, that makes sense to me, is that we're essentially earmarking these funds in a way to say, this money, because of this extra development, we're gonna need some extra TLC on these roads and infrastructure. And we're saying, because of that, we're trying to plan ahead, keep this money separate from the rest of the city budget and say it can only be used here in this area. Is that a fair way to explain it in layman's terms?
Yes, and so it's
Yeah.
not necessarily just you. I mean, generally, and we talked about this a little bit before, but it's not something necessarily, it's just a geographic thing. But this money does legally have to be used to benefit that area.
Right, so
Now-
it's not just those couple blocks, it can be roads that lead to those couple blocks. or
yes.
The park next to those couple blocks.
Yeah, and as things get redeveloped over there, I know that in the past, there's been some issues where you don't have the resources to help redevelop some properties and to remediate properties and to make them able to be redeveloped. And so these funds can be used for that purpose, or they could be used for roads or other sidewalks and things like that. So there is some flexibility, not as much as just general fund dollars, but it does have some flexibility there with the definitional.
Thanks, yeah, I figure if someone asks, just want to make sure I have the right idea. and
Yeah, that's the
not-
idea, is that you don't take it and use it somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's there to create the infrastructure so that private development can take place or improvement in the area that is served by that infrastructure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Mrs. Winbauer.
Is there a limit to how many of these type of TIFs we can have within the city, or?
No. There's a certain type of TIF that it can't be a certain percentage of your overall assessed valuation, but you'd have a long way to go before you got into that, and this type isn't really substitute. I mean, one of the examples used about the city of Cincinnati, I mean, they at one point, and like I said, they're all very different, but they have, if you ever look at a map, I think it's online somewhere, you'll see that they have very broad TIF districts running north and south along the city and then along the river down there, and they sometimes do them for particular projects, but you'll see with some of these development projects that they have, and you read about them in the Business Courier or the paper, they'll say, oh, we're putting, a few $1 million of TIF money into this project. So it's available so that if someone were to need it to get a project over the hump or to build the infrastructure to make it operational, they have that there. And this is sort of a forward-looking type of arrangement like that, so that you can have the wherewithal to, if you were so to choose, to incentivize or to facilitate that development.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Thompson, second by Mrs. Hoover, suspend the rules and have all three readings. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes.
An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property within the city of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose and exempt from real property taxation, requiring the owners of those parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit such real property, authorizing the distribution of the applicable portion of those service payments to the Norwood City School District and Great Oaks Institute of Technology and Career Development, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property within the city of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose and exempt from real property taxation, requiring the owners of those parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit such real property, authorizing the distribution of the applicable portion of those service payments to the Norwood City School District and Great Oaks Institute of Technology and Career Development, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property within the city of Norwood, Ohio, to be a public purpose and exempt from real property taxation, requiring the owners of those parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes, establishing a municipal public improvement tax increment equivalent fund for the deposit of those service payments, specifying the public infrastructure improvements to be made that directly benefit such real property, authorizing the distribution of the applicable portion of those service payments to the Norwood City School District and Great Oaks Institute of Technology and Career Development, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. It was a mouthful, wasn't it?
Times three.
Motion to pass the ordinance.
We have a motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Second by Mrs. Franzen. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item N, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. I'll stay on that subject. The fund that you just put together, the TIF that you just approved, is a proactive approach by the administration brought to us by bond counsel to say this is what can be done in the city of Norwood. This is what needs to be done in a timely manner. And it was Pat Woodside who brought this to us, and we have other people that work on these things that said, here's the right way to move forward if you want to really put things on steroids. So you can put development on steroids. We can really move forward with this. It's not, you'd use the word specific development. It's not keyed into a specific development. This is something that the city can look at. There are deals that are done that are put in place that have specific developments that say, we're going to do infrastructure. You got to do infrastructure improvements for this development. And that's all a part of that package, right? This is not tied to a specific. This is a tool that bond counsel said, you probably really need to take advantage of this. And you guys brought up some very good questions on how and why we should be doing that. And this is a proactive approach to really putting a path forward where we can be, productive and get things done in the city like we've never been able to. We haven't been able to do the last 4 years, and I don't know that we were able to do it the last 20 years. but this is a proactive approach brought to us by the finance people that really know the best route. And when you talk about other municipalities using these tools, it's like, well, the Norwood hasn't used it. Why haven't we used these tools in the past? Well, that's the right time. And we've got to strike while the iron's hot, because it's December 27th and things change. January 1st, things change. So this is one of those times where you look at it and say, yes, we absolutely need to do 3 readings. We need to pass this now. We need to grab hold of this while we can. And I appreciate it and really, really thank you for moving forward in the direction and doing all your homework, because you guys did a lot of homework on this, trying to figure out. Very good questions. So I appreciate that. The fund that you guys will need to be the people that are on the finance committee for next year, Park Avenue Municipal Public Improvement TIF. You'll see that coming up in budget stuff and all that. So it's the Park Avenue, not designated for a specific project at this time, but it's going to be helpful to us as we move forward. The Lincoln Avenue resurfacing project, they're working on that. There's been a lot of discussion about the water towers, the removal of the water towers or not removal of the water towers. How much does that cost? What can we do at Tower Park? How can we make that a much more friendly and usable park? I know there's a lot of different things going on with that. It's going to be interesting how that works out in the next, 3-6 months as those things move forward. The water meter project, the residential water meters are all pretty much completed. We still have some of the commercial water meter stuff going on, but that project's moved forward pretty well. Leaf season's over. If you're thinking about public work, you're thinking about raking out your big pile of leaves, don't rake them out now. You got to bag them up. The good thing is you can buy bags at Lowe's or Home Depot or any of the different stores, but you can also get bags. I know it was mentioned at the last council meeting, the paper bags are free at the health department. They're free to citizens of the city of Norwood for their maintaining their property. We really do purchase them, but we use our recycle funds. We receive some recycle funds back, and that's where those funds come from. So, going back to Lincoln Avenue is one of the streets that's going to be started. We had hoped they'd started working on concrete and doing some things on Smith and Carthage, because that's 561 is the big project for next year. They did the pre-construction meeting, but the holidays hit. We weren't able to get that really started, but it'll get started as soon as we get some good weather. So you'll see that going on. But then road rehabilitation, they're resurfacing a road right out in front of my office, not here at City Hall, my other office. And as the roller went past, as they laid down that as the roller went past, you could almost feel the building vibrating. And they are using these same rollers, these same vibrating rollers, when they repave streets in the city of Norwood. So we mill them, right? We take them down and make a flat, and then we put that nice, beautiful layer of blacktop on, and then we run this roller over. And so then what happens is 3 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later, there's a water leak. Because our water main is an old water main, and we do have challenges with that. So when you see a brand new road surface now that 6 months later they're digging into, it's because that's just an after product. It happens. And I know I don't like it. Clint doesn't like it. None of us like it. Nobody wants to dig into that, but it's a necessity. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you do it. The senior center, we've got some staffing changes. We're going to have some really positive improvements going on with the senior programming and different things going on. Not that it wasn't done well in the past, but people do retire. So now we've got some fresh perspectives coming in. The senior program manager is going to work under the direction of the recreation director. So there will be a structure there for all the programming, and we'll see that there's some interesting stuff going on there. We hope to put out some information on that hiring process and some of the things that we're doing to get that going. As you know, it's not great to hire people right now, and hasn't been for the last few months, but let's see. The last part I'll talk about is the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission meeting that Ken and I just sat in, and we talked a lot about getting out of the fiscal emergency, out from under that, and the reasons why. And the reasons why we shouldn't have been there in the first place, and why we should be out of that. So we are working hard to move the city away from that. It has something to do with home rule and some powers granted to municipal corporations, and Article 18 that was put in place in 1912 on home rule. And we're in a position where we're going to keep moving forward, but we'd like to see ourselves out of that. And then the last two things I'll talk about is Married with Mics. I don't know if any of you listen to WGRR, but Cumulus Radio is right here in the city of Norwood, been here for the last 15 years. I think they just signed a new 10-year lease, so we'll continue having them here. But Chris and Janine with Married with Mics just retired last Friday after 28 years in the city. And then Elizabeth Angelo received the Stars and Stripes Award, which is highest recognition for the American Heritage Girls. And I was able to do a proclamation at that also. Cynthia and Anthony Angelo have a couple of children who are involved in it, doing great things for the community. So that's about it. A great holiday so far. You know, we're still in it. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions or comments for Mayor Schneider? Thank you, sir. Moving on to item O, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening? Mrs. Silver?
I will be super brief. These are mostly reminders. We have the MLK blood drive coming up on Saturday, January the 13th. There is some information on the city website. We're starting to distribute information around the community, so hopefully you will see that. We really want to have every single spot filled, so looking forward to people signing up. We'll also be having some service opportunities that week, and that link should be going live hopefully in the next day or so. And just to let people know, we still have a spot on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Advisory Board. Will be meeting next week. And there's the date to get your letter of interest in is this Friday. So if you're interested in that, please reach out, send a letter. That's all I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoover. Anyone else? Any other unfinished business this evening? Moving on to item P, new business. Any new business this evening? No? Then we'll continue on. We don't have any communications this evening, so we'll move right to adjournment. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Kelch? Motion by Mr. Kelch. Mr. Braden?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Braden.
Feel like we have something to say,
About the inauguration?
well, about the inauguration and about some people that might not be around next year. And, I just want to, tell everybody that I appreciate your service. And, if you're not going to be here next term, I really, I respect, and I've learned a lot from everybody here. Your moral clarity, and every time I try to learn from someone that I believe is doing right, I believe you've done good, and I'm going to miss you, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Kelch. So I wish you well in your endeavors.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Anyone else? Mr. Kelch?
Don't miss me, man. I'll see you in softball.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mrs. Franzen?
And thank you, Mr. Miracle, for serving as president, and we're excited to, keep working with you as auditor. So not really goodbye, but thank you for keeping the meeting in order.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir.
All members present, voting. We are adjourned. Motion passes.